Welcome to Africa's Vision Network, and we're here for our part 2 of an evening with Tony Browder. I am your host, Princess Ayo. Now, last time we were talking about the Karmic Institute, what karma means, and it was really exciting. You were telling us about the different tours and people's reactions to the tours, and now we're going to talk about the actual Egyptian experience and the Egyptian symbols and things like that that we could learn from. And the first question is, why is the Nile Valley history important for people of African descent?
Well, the Nile Valley is important because it represents the oldest documented history and culture on Earth. It's important because we find that it was from the Nile Valley that most cultures and civilization have gained knowledge about those things that make civilization great, and that as mankind developed throughout the years, they have adopted, incorporated, stolen, modified elements of ancient Kemetic or Egyptian culture. And the issue has gone through so many transformations that now we are often surrounded by ancient Egyptian images, but we don't know that they're Egyptian. Case in point, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the symbol that represents the capital of the most powerful nation on earth is, of course, the Washington Monument. But how many people know that the Washington Monument is nothing more than a replica of an African symbol that represents the resurrection of an African god, Asar, who was resurrected over 6,000 years ago. Now, at some point, when you begin to become familiar with this history, you have to ask the question, why is this monument here? Why is it placed in the center of the mall on the prime meridian for the city? Why was it that Thomas Jefferson in 1804 wanted to pass legislation which would make the prime meridian for planet Earth at the location where the Washington Monument now stands? Did they know something then that we don't know today? And of course that answer is yes. What I've been able to uncover through my research, and particularly through my second publication, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, is the extent to which ancient Egypt influenced the founding of the United States and the development of Washington, D.C. It's interesting to note that Washington is significant because it represents the first city that was built within the last 500 years that was actually designed on paper before construction began. And so George Washington was responsible for designating this site. And one of the reasons why this site was selected was because of its proximity to the Potomac River. The Potomac River, to the developers of Washington, D.C., was to mimic the Nile River. Right? And in ancient Egypt, the Nile was the lifeblood of that land. The Nile flowed from the south to the north. The Nile is the longest river in the world, the only river in the world which flows from the south to the north. And as the people of ancient Kemet began to identify with their environment, what they noticed was that the sun would rise every morning on the east bank of the Nile, set every night on the west bank of the Nile. And so since the sun was a symbol associated with God, who was known by many names in Kemet. Ra was one name for the sun at high noon. Amen was a name for the sun when it set. Amen means hidden. And so within the Christian religion, we still use that word today to acknowledge the hidden presence of God. It's an African concept, an ancient African concept. And so the east was associated with life, since the sun or God was born on the east bank of the Nile. The west was associated with death, since the sun or God died on the west bank. So in the Nile Valley, they would build their temples, they would build their cities and their palaces on the east bank of the Nile. They would bury their dead on the west bank of the Nile. That's where you find the Valley of the Kings, the Valley of the Queens, the Valley of the Nobles. If we fast forward to Washington, D.C., 1780, when the city was laid out, we have originally the city was culled from the states of Virginia on the west side of the Potomac and the state of Maryland on the east side of the Potomac. But in 1840, Virginia was given back to the Commonwealth, and only the land on the east side was developed. And so if we look at the relationship of the development of Washington, D.C., we see that only the land on the east side, the side associated with life, was developed. But if we go just north of the Lincoln Memorial, behind the Lincoln Memorial, there's a bridge. The bridge takes you across the Potomac River over to the west bank of the Potomac River into Arlington Cemetery, their Valley of the Kings, their Valley of the Queens, their Valley of the Nobles. And so with an understanding of ancient Egyptian history, architecture, symbolism, mythology, you can begin, or I have shown the extent to which ancient Egypt has influenced or impacted the United States of America. Another example, if I can give you one very quickly. Another example that everybody can relate to can be found on the back of the dollar bill. The symbols on the reverse of the dollar bill, the Great Seal, are in fact African symbols. The design of that seal did not come about by happenstance. In 1776, when this country was founded, one of the first acts that George Washington initiated was to organize a committee whose job it was to design the Great Seal. It took them 6 years to come up with the design for that seal. So the artist in me, the designer in me, the historian in me knows that all of the symbols that are there on the Great Seal are not there by accident. And so what do we see? On the reverse of the Great Seal, we see a pyramid. At last count, there were over 92 pyramids in Egypt. There's over 180 pyramids in the Sudan, south of Egypt. There are no pyramids in France, England, Germany, Rome, Nova Scotia. This is an African symbol. The pyramid is comprised of 13 courses of stone. The eye above the pyramid is the eye of Heru. Who is Heru? Heru is the son of Asar, which is the name of the person who died and was resurrected in ancient Kemet. Asar's symbol is the Washington Monument. The symbol of his son, Heru, is the symbol above the pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. That's not an accident.
Why did they do that?
Why did they do that? If you understand, the nature of human beings has not changed over 500 years, over 5,000 years. Human beings have a basic desire for food, clothing, shelter, have a basic desire to look at what is important to them, what can improve their life, and to incorporate those things into their lives. And so when the people responsible for developing this new nation here in America sought out the task of building or laying a foundation for this new nation, they wanted to study the best. And so the men who were responsible for developing this nation, for the most part, were practicing Masons. 52 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Masons. 13 of the signers of the Constitution were Masons. At least 14 of the presidents of the United States have been Masons. And within European Masonry, they acknowledge ancient Egypt as the source of their knowledge base. All of the generals who fought in the Revolutionary War under George Washington were Masons. And so there's a direct relationship between Masonry and ancient Egypt. And so what you find in Europe, you can find it in France, you can find it in Germany, you can find it in England, and specifically you can find it here in the United States. When it came to establishing a new nation, what better model can you use than the model of the greatest nation on earth? That is the reason why you'll find pyramids, you'll find tekenu, what the Greeks later called obelisks, here in the city. That's why you'll find pyramids on the back of the dollar bill. That's why you'll find a architectural layout of the city that models city planning that was first developed in Kemet over 6,000 years ago. People replicate that which impresses them. It has been that way since the beginning of time.
Thrilling and amazing. I know that everybody's learning a lot. But when did they change the name from Kemet to Egypt?
Kemet came about as a result of, or Egypt came about as a result of Kemet being conquered by foreigners, specifically the Greeks. Egypt is a Greek word. Egypt is a Greek word that represents the Greek attempt to describe a temple, one temple, which was in the city of Mennefer. The city of Mennefer, and this is a good point to add to our discussion as well. The city of Mennefer was the original capital of ancient Kemet. The king, or the pharaoh of ancient Kemet, had his palace in the city of Mennefer, and his palace was called the Double White House.
Oh, for goodness sake.
The city of Mennefer was later renamed Memphis by the Greeks. Right? And so the Greeks called one particular temple, the Temple of Ptah, the name that has now come down to us over the years as Egypt was the Greeks' attempt to identify that Temple of Ptah in the city of Mennefer. I might add that when Andrew Jackson, one of the 3 Masonic founders of the city of Memphis, Tennessee, decided to designate that site as a major city to be developed. They chose that site because of its proximity to the Mississippi River. Again, we have the Mississippi Nile comparison, and they named that city Memphis, Tennessee, after Memphis in Kemet. And I found just through my general research a whole host of cities throughout the United States that have Egyptian names. In my home state of Illinois, the city in the southernmost part of Illinois is a city called Cairo, Illinois, or Cairo, Illinois.
Oh,
the whole southern portion of Illinois is referred to as Little Egypt because it's a delta region. And in that vicinity, within a 50-mile radius of the southern Illinois border, I've identified no less than 12 cities that are named after Egyptian cities, Karnak, or Luxor, or Thebes. And so during my research, I found attempts by numerous people, specifically politicians, governors, mayors, architects, and engineers. As they underwent the process of developing a city, they used ancient Egypt as a model. I mentioned to you that I was recently in Indianapolis for an educational conference. And I have developed in Indianapolis over the last several years a tour, a cultural tour of Indianapolis that is identical to the cultural tour that I developed here in Washington, D.C. back in 1986. Indianapolis is modeled after Washington, D.C. Because Alexander, they have a Tekken or an obelisk in the center of the city. They have a mall area, which is similar to the mall here in D.C., and it has a Tekken in it. There are Egyptian-styled architectural structures around the center part of the city. And what I found in doing my research on Indianapolis, that Indianapolis was designed by the architect Alexander Ralston, who was an assistant to Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the architect who was responsible for laying out Washington, D.C. in 1781. And as Ralston said in his works, it was his desire in laying out Indianapolis to recreate architecturally and symbolically Washington, D.C.
You know, and I was going to ask you why have the tours and the study groups, but by listening to you, I answer my own question that it's just so much education that we can get. And of course, we can't get it all in our 1 hour show, but so when you have these study groups, and how do people form them, and how do we learn more, I guess is what I really want to know, and conferences coming up, and what's happening that we can learn more about this?
Well, I can give a telephone number or an address if people are interested. They can contact the Institute through our telephone number, 301-853-2465. They can contact us on our website, www.karmic-ikg.com. We have a conference coming up in October 26th, 27th, and 28th. It's going to be held at the University of the District of Columbia. The theme of the conference is Melanin, Culture, and Consciousness. We'll be discussing issues pertaining to history, culture, consciousness, from a variety of perspectives. We'll have workshops, we'll have a movie premiere, we have keynote addresses. We do the tours of Washington on an ongoing basis.
During the conference?
Yes, we will sponsor the tour on Sunday, the 28th at 1:30. We have the tours, and we also open the tours to the general public throughout the course of the month.
Right.
So people can contact us.
That's exciting, and people, of course, can call that number, but they can also email this station, this show, and of course we'll be able to send them more information. I have a question that I've always wanted to know, and I see it. Why are noses and lips missing from many of the sphinxes?
Well, two things. One, in an attempt to reclaim the history, we have to reclaim the names. Just as Egypt is a Greek word, so is the word Sphinx, is a Greek word. The indigenous name for that statue is Her-em-Aket. It means Heru on the horizon. It is the face of Heru, the son of the resurrected God. So the eye above the pyramid is the eye of Heru. That statue, which the Greeks call the Sphinx, which is the largest sculpture ever carved by human beings, 240 feet long, 66 feet high. The face of the statue is 13 feet 8 inches wide. Is the face of Heru, the son of the resurrected God. It is the face of an African. When you see that face, it is the face of an African. And so based upon research that I've done, and I've detailed it in my book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, when Napoleon conquered Egypt in 1798, he came upon this statue, which was at that time literally buried up to its neck in sand. Napoleon saw this almost 14-foot wide face of an African staring out at him, and behind it were the pyramids at the Giza Plateau. And it is said that Napoleon was unwilling to accept the historical reality that he was confronted with. So he instructed his soldiers to shoot the nose and the lips off of this statue. Napoleon, after that event occurred, Napoleon was said to have quoted the words of the French philosopher Voltaire, that history is the lie agreed upon. Now, there are others who question this event, and so in my work, I document everything that I offer. We have established a precedent of Napoleon shooting the noses off of other objects when Napoleon and his troops conquered Italy. Specifically, the name of the city escapes me at the moment, but it was a monastery at Maria del Grazia in Italy. It was a monastery in which Leonardo da Vinci had painted the famous religious scene called the Last Supper. When Napoleon's army conquered that city, his soldiers used that room as a stable, and his soldiers used their rifles to shoot the nose off the face of Jesus Christ. So there's a precedent for Napoleon's soldiers disfiguring historical monuments. In the British Museum, you can find a portion of the beard of this statue on display. And I've been told through reliable sources that the shattered pieces of the nose and lips of the statue are in the basement of the British Museum. They are not on display. The British Museum does have on display other artifacts that Napoleon acquired during his 3 years in Egypt. And so one other interesting aspect about that question is that after Egypt was conquered by foreigners, specifically the Greeks, then one of the things that they wanted to do was to modify ancient Egypt so that it became a reflection of their culture. And so they established Ptolemy, the general Ptolemy, who gained control of Egypt after Alexander of Macedonia died. Then he established a university named after his fallen leader, established that university in the northernmost part of Egypt in a city named after his fallen comrade, Alexander. They established the University of Alexandria and the Library of Alexandria, where they gave Greek scholars an opportunity to come to Egypt to study. So Euclid, the Greek father of geometry, studied in Egypt 25 years before he returned home to become the father of geometry. The fathers of philosophy studied Kemetic philosophy before they became known as philosophers in ancient Egypt. Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, practiced medicine over 1900 years after Imhotep, who is shown at the College of Surgeons in my hometown, Chicago. They acknowledged Imhotep as the first physician in recorded history. And so we need to understand that when other people conquer a land, they take on all of the wonderful attributes of that land. And so what happened during the Greek reign, during the Roman reign, is that when the European invaders came into Kemet, some of the noses of the African statues were disfigured. I would say that approximately 70 to 80% of the statues of the ancient Egyptians are missing heads, noses, and lips. Many of the statues of the Egyptians who ruled Egypt after it was conquered by the Romans in 332 BCE, or the Greeks, the Greeks in 332 BCE, or the Romans in 30 BCE, those statues have the noses and lips intact. Those statues look like Europeans. So when you go through the Cairo Museum, the statues that in many instances the guides there will show you as statues of the Egyptians are statues of Egyptians that were made after Kemet was conquered first by the Greeks and then the Romans. But if you don't have the opportunity to travel to Kemet with someone who has this background, then you can go to Egypt and leave Egypt believing that the Egyptians were Caucasian or at best non-African, when historically that is not the case.
And when we go to Egypt today, and I know we talked about this during the break, but how did the Arabs has affected the Egypt we're going to see today?
Right. Well, one of the things we have to understand is that when people conquer a territory, they take on everything within that territory, the history, the culture, and the artifacts. The Arabs who now occupy Egypt conquered Egypt in the 7th century A.D. Muslims came in and conquered the territory. And so they now are, the modern day Egyptian is a composite of the indigenous Kimchu, who they call Nubians today, the Arabs who invaded 7th century A.D., the Greeks, the Romans, the French, the British. So they are a amalgam of numerous conquerors. They are not the indigenous Egyptians. They are not the indigenous descendants of the builders of the pyramids. And so, I've had numerous conversations with my Egyptian friends, and when I lay out the history, they do have to acknowledge that is in fact the case. But one of the things that's so disturbing for African Americans, primarily who travel to Egypt today, is to see the extent to which the history and the culture of African ancestors is being prostituted, if you will, by the invaders of that land, who have no direct connection to that history and culture.
So they're the tour guides, or they're
not just the tour guides. They're the people who have lived there for 300 and 400 years. Who say that we are Egyptians, but their ancestors built none of the monuments that they are now profiting from tourism, which accounts for over 65% of the economy in ancient Egypt.
And I wouldn't say it's all the Egyptians that I've met that are in America, but most of the Egyptians I've met here look quite Arab.
Yes, yes. Okay. Well, again, we have to realize that the Arabs came there as conquerors. If you travel to Upper Egypt is in the south. If you travel to Upper Egypt, you'll see more of the faces of the descendants of the indigenous people. They are called Nubians.
Do they look like us, or are they just darker Arab-looking people?
They look like they are African people.
Okay.
They are African people who, over the past centuries, have been mixed with the Arab people who have lived there, with the British who have lived there, with the French who have lived there, but they still have that African hair, they still have that African nose, they still have that African complexion. And if you go far enough to the south, you'll see people who have not been the product of race mixing, as people call it. But again, if we get back to what we talked about in the first show, there is only one race, the human race, which had its origins in Africa. And so what's vitally important for people to understand is the role that Africa has played in the development of humanity, culture, and civilization. And if we can begin to see Africa as the birthplace of humanity, as the birthplace of religion, as the birthplace of culture and civilization, then it could open the door for people to begin to see ourselves as human beings who are of African ancestry, and not as whites or Hispanics or others. But it's going to take a profound educational retransformation in order for this to occur.
Yes. You know, you talked about this, the beginning of civilization being in Africa, and I'm just wondering if you could, in a short time, because of course time is running out again, got like 3 minutes, but to explain how Africa is the birthplace of the 3 major religions.
Well, what we'll find is that there's a wonderful book written by a Jewish biblical scholar and Egyptologist and attorney. His name is Gary Greenberg, and the book is 101 Bible Myths. And what Dr. Greenberg has been able to show is a direct comparison between the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, Genesis, and their direct counterpart in the ancient Egyptian text, Medu Neter, the beginning of the world, the creation of the world by a supreme being. That writing first came out of Kemet. The establishment or the creation of man from the earth comes out of Kemet. The idea of
because the Garden of Eden is
the idea of the tree of knowledge comes out of Kemet. The idea of the salvation of the soul, judgment of the deceased, is an African concept. I referenced earlier Asar, whose symbol is now the Washington Monument. After Asar was resurrected in ancient Kemet, and this is a story that can be traced back at least 6,000 years ago, Asar was resurrected from the dead, and he became known as the Lord of Judgment. He sits on the throne of judgment, and the soul of the deceased must come before him on Judgment Day. Another interesting point I'd like to add is that Asar's son, Heru, was conceived after Asar was dead. That is, in the story as it is told by these African people, the spirit of Asar impregnated his wife, Aset, who, by the way, was a virgin. And 9 months after she was impregnated, Aset gave birth to her son Heru, who was born to avenge the murder of his father and to restore his father's kingdom. Oh, by the way, Heru was born on December the 25th. I can take you to the temple of Abydos in Egypt and show you this story. When Heru was born on December the 25th, there was a star, a mysterious star, shining in the east. There were 3 kings who came to present him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This story is carved on a temple, the temple of Ramesses II in Luxor, a temple that was constructed around 1200 BCE, over 1200 years before the birth of Jesus the Christ. So what I'm saying is, when we open our minds to begin to read and study, we will find that African people have given the world much more than we can ever understand. And it's only through a sincere desire to want to know the truth about history, the truth about humanity, the truth about culture, that we can unleash the shackles of ignorance, of racism, of religious prejudice that have divided the world for thousands of years. I just returned from Jerusalem. And as our guy pointed out, Jerusalem, or Israel in general, has been the site of more wars in the name of God than anywhere else on earth. And so one of the things that I'm suggesting to your listeners is that they do some in-depth reading about the development of religion.
And we can get this from you, because I know we have 2 seconds. Get this from your website, where I know they can order your books.
Yes.
And your books will teach us more, and we can read it and have it. And I'm so excited that you're here.
It's been my pleasure.
And it's just been an education for me. And I must say again, I needed this right in my life right this minute. And I really appreciate you being here, and for you allowing the universe to let you be here, too, because you could have resisted. And I know the audience, you have learned so much from this. I know you've enjoyed this. I'm so glad we were able to bring you part 2. And so please join us again when we give you another exciting show on Africa's Vision Network.